Hi. Hey, hello. I'm Chelsea. Welcome back to my channel where we talk books. Today we have a very exciting video. I am going to be talking about books that I think are underrated, underloved. They are just not talked about enough. Some of these books I have never heard people really talk about, and then some of them I think some YouTubers have talked about them on their channel before, but you know what? They just don't get enough love. So we're going to talk about them today. These books are just from like a variety of different genres. I got a thriller here. I got some contemporary literature. I got a nonfiction, and as well as a science fiction, which is not my genre. So I'm just going to get straight into the books. The first one is a relatively new one. I think it came out like early this year. And that is called The Postcard by Berest. I'm not sure if that's how you say her last name. She's French. And so this is the nonfiction one. I devoured this book. I thought it was beautifully written. It was an interesting story. And it read like fiction. So basically it's the story of this woman's family, and it starts off, her mother, Lila, gets a postcard, and it's a mysterious postcard. The postcard just has the names of 4 of her family members who died in the Holocaust, in Auschwitz. And the mother, Lila, which is Anne's mother, sort of takes this as like, it's like threatening. It's like somebody who's out to get like the family. Something is wrong with this picture here. Like, why would somebody send this postcard? Meanwhile, Anne, who doesn't know too much about her family, especially the family members that died during the Holocaust, sort of takes this as she takes it mysteriously. She's like, what? Who would send this? She takes it a little more seriously than her mom. Her mom is a little afraid from it, and Anne is more like, we need to find out what this is. Like, what does this mean? What is this? Who wrote it? And thus they start the journey. Anne just really goes deep into her family's history. So the story is one that was beautifully told. The first part of the story is really just about her family members who, well, her grandmother lived through the Holocaust, Miriam, and then her sister and her brother and her father and her mother did not. And so it's really the story, the first part of the book is the story of her family members during the Holocaust, and how her grandmother Miriam was able to survive and also be part of the resistance. And it was sad. The first part of the story was really sort of hard to read, but it was so beautifully told as well. You could tell that the author really wanted to do her family's story justice, and yeah, she just did a wonderful job. And then the second part of the book is really about sort of Anne and her mother Lila. I'm not really sure. It's French. That doesn't sound like a French name, but that's how I read it, so I don't know. Anyway, so it's sort of their journey on figuring out what is this postcard, and they go far. They go back to their family's original village in France, and they sort of speak to the other families who would have known them, and try and figure out their family history and how they connect. And like her mother is really sort of not. She doesn't want to dig up too much of the past because it's hard, you know. But Anne she wants to really investigate this and find out what does this postcard mean, and what did it mean for her family. But overall, it was a kind of a hard book to read. She does go into a lot of like detailed history about very specific part of like France and very specific to her family. But overall, I was just like so intrigued by the story and just how dedicated she was to telling her family's story and investigating what happened to them and what this postcard really means. And yeah, it was just, it was a beautiful book that I don't think a lot of people, I haven't heard too many people talk about it. And yeah, I really enjoyed that one. The next book is on a bit of a lighter note, and it is called Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Plet. This one is also a bit of a newer release. I think it came out within the last year or two. I loved this one. This one was so sweet, and it just like made me all happy and warm inside. This one is the story of a older woman who is working at a aquarium in a small town, and she works as the janitor. So she works at night and she sort of just cleans the aquarium, and she oddly enough befriends the giant octopus Marcus that is a resident at this aquarium. And it's like such a beautiful friendship that they have. It's so like sweet, and just and Marcus as like a character, to have an octopus as a character, like you get the perspective of like him, and it's just so written like so smart and sweet, and he's like a funny character, and it's just so interesting to have like an octopus perspective. I don't know how accurate it is, you know, like I don't think we can ever accurately get a perspective from an octopus, but it was really sweet, and like I loved the chapters that were Marcus's point of view. But yeah, it's sort of their friendship, and so this woman is sort of lonely. She lost her husband, and she lost her son to sort of like mysteriously. He mysteriously went missing years like 25 years ago, something like that. And so she is lonely, and she is still sort of grieving the loss of her son, because it was like mysterious. Nobody ever found out what happened to him, nothing like that. And Marcus sort of takes it upon himself. The cute little octopus is like, I want to help this woman. And he sort of does in so many different magical ways. There's also enter another character. So Tova, which is the older woman who is the janitor, she hurts herself while she's cleaning, and she has to take a break from doing the job, as much as she hates to do that. And so they end up needing a new janitor, and comes this new guy, Cameron, and he's young, and he's sort of lost. He's like a wanderer, a wild child, shall we say. And he just sort of stumbles into it. He's here because he's in that small town because he's on the search for his father. He doesn't have the greatest relationship with his mother, but he knows that his father was from this town, or he has an inkling that his father was at some point in his life in this town. And so he's sort of there searching for family connections. He's also lonely. I'm seeing a theme here. And so he ends up being able to get the job as the temporary janitor at the aquarium. And he too sort of, I mean, it's a bit harder for him to befriend the octopus, because the octopus is really like all about Tova and wants her back, understandably. But Tova is concerned about how the sort of new janitor is going, so she comes while he's cleaning, and she ends up befriending Cameron. And then because of that, the octopus then also becomes friendly with Cameron. And these three, I wouldn't say people, I guess these two people's story and then the animal story, the octopus story, sort of interweaves a little. They just, you know, things start happening, things start all connecting together, and it was such a beautiful story. It made me feel warm and fuzzy, and it was really sweet, and I may have also cried at the end. But yeah, this one was just a really, like, honestly, I feel like I don't read a whole lot of stories that make me feel as warm and fuzzy as this one did. I do love animals, so that could have something to do with it. But even if, like, I feel like this was just such an interesting story because of the perspective that you get from the octopus. But yeah, that was a really sweet one. I loved it. I feel like not enough people are talking about it. Not enough love for remarkably bright creatures. It was a really great one. Next one we have, I do have a physical copy. I read Remarkable Bright Creatures on my Kindle or something, so I don't have that copy. But the next one is, it's a hefty book, but it's worth it. It's worth it. And that one is Pachinko. Yeah, by Min Jin Lee. I read this one last year at some point. I read it for like a book club, I think, that I was at one time part of. But I loved this one. It was such a beautiful, like, it was just so well told. I think they recently actually made a Apple Plus TV show, TV series, which did not, I don't think it did the book justice. It was all right, but the book, so much better. So this book is a intergenerational family story, an epic saga, which really focuses on sort of one woman's family. Her name is, wait, let me get it here. Sunja. I'm not really sure how it's supposed to be pronounced, but that, I think, is how I sort of read it. And she is a sort of not well off. She's the daughter of a fisherman in Korea. She is a Korean in Korea. And she, and as a teenager, as a youth, falls for this wealthy older man. And he sort of, you know, he's putting on all the moves. He's really being, you know, charismatic, and he wants her. And she falls for it. And she then also falls pregnant. So I'm sure you can see where this is going. It does not end well for their relationship. He ends up being married and not wanting the child, really. Not wanting to have much to do with the child. And, you know, it takes place in the 1900s. So this, you know, being pregnant with no husband at that young of an age is kind of a no-no. You know, it brings shame upon her family type deal. So she ends up meeting this guy, this other guy, who is really sweet. He's like a sweet older man, again with the older men, but whatever. He passes through town, and he's a minister, and he's sort of old, a little sickly. But, you know, he's like, I can care for you. And so she ends up marrying him. She has her child with the wealthy man's child, and then she gets pregnant again with her new husband's child. And so, and then unfortunately, shortly after she gets pregnant, he dies. And here she is once again, sort of single mom with two kids now, 2 boys. But the story is really focusing on her and her family. So you really see sort of her sons grow up, and then you get the perspective of their families, and her two sons sort of go very different paths. One gets involved in some, I think it's considered criminal activity at Pachinko. I think I'm saying that right. Is like gambling, from what I understand it. It's kind of like a casino. And yeah. Oh, I forgot to say. So a very important part of the story is that it takes place sort of, so she and her family are Korean, and she sort of moves to Japan at some point. And you really see how the treatment of the sort of Korean in Japan, there's a lot of, you know, discrimination. Yeah, I didn't know too much about that relationship between Korea and Japan. But yeah, that is sort of what happens in terms of where the story takes place. We get really deep connections with the characters. It's really like a character-driven story, and I love those kind of stories. As you can see by the, you know, it's a hefty one. There's a lot in here, but it was totally worth it. It was so beautifully written, and I feel like I learned quite a bit about, you know, the culture of Korea and the culture of Japan, and just sort of a bit of the history, which I thought was interesting. But mainly it's a character story, and it's a beautiful character story. I enjoyed this one, and I feel like not enough people talk about it. Yeah, beautifully written, beautifully told story. So the next book is called, it's a really well-known one, but I feel like it's an older book. I think it was from the late 90s, early 2000s time, but I read it, I think, only a year ago, and it's in there. It's like in my brain. Maybe not even a year ago. I may have read it this year, like at the very beginning of the year. Anyway, it has stuck. That's how I know that I loved a book, when I like cannot stop thinking about the book. And yeah, that is how I know. But anyway, this one, you know, they made a movie about it. It won an Oscar. No big deal. This one is called Mystic River by Dennis Lehane. It's a dark one, but I was surprised, honestly, at how much I really loved the book. But yeah, it was so beautifully written, and like I just, again, the characters, I think it's like a running theme. I love books that are like sort of character driven, and the characters in this book had sort of they were so well developed, and they had a lot of sort of interesting storylines. But yeah, if you don't know, if you've never seen the movie, which, you know what, I did enjoy the book better than the movie, but anyway, it starts off, 3 young boys from Boston, Jimmy, Dave, and Sean, and they sort of just are neighborhood friends. They're not besties or anything, but they're just sort of playing in the streets, and this car sort of comes along, and these 2 men get out and say that they are cops, and that these kids are in trouble, and that they need to come with them. And, you know, the boys are kind of all like, you know, they're like suspicious. But one of the boys, little Dave, he gets in the car. He's rounded up, and is basically abducted. These men were not cops, okay? That was a lie. These men abducted him, and he was gone for days and miraculously escaped. And he didn't really detail, they don't really detail what happened to him, but, you know, you can kind of get your mind wandering, you know, you get it. He was clearly abused during his time with them. The story just sort of follows these three guys and how changed their worlds are after this one event. So sort of fast forward a couple of years and we see that Sean is now a detective. He's got a wife and a kid, which their relationships aren't great, but he's a detective in this Boston sort of suburb. It's like a suburb of Boston. And then you got Jimmy, who is an ex-con, and he's got a past. He's got a criminal past. And yeah, Jimmy, he's got like a store, like a general store, grocery store, something like that. He's running. He's no longer in the criminal realm, but you know, he's known as being a criminal, an ex-criminal, I guess. And then you got Dave, who's just sort of the poor guy is lost. You know, he's just like, yikes. Not a great life considering what happened to him when he was young. That's understandable. And so the story follows these three guys. Jimmy, his daughter ends up going missing and then turns up dead. And he is devastated. And he goes on a vendetta to find out who did this to his daughter, who is the culprit. You know, things happen and Dave ends up sort of being a potential suspect. And that's sort of where the story, I'm not going to say much more because, you know, that's the story. Things explode, things happen, and you know what? Friendships sort of come into question, and the past of these people and the past traumas of, you know, all three characters really, but mostly Dave and Jimmy, are sort of explored. This was a dark one, but it was beautifully told. And I was captivated. This book brought up a lot of emotions, and it just, I feel like it is not loved upon enough. I think the movie kind of maybe overshadows it a bit because Sean Penn won that Oscar, and the movie was good, but the book was better. The book was definitely better. But yeah, that is Mystic River. The ending had me just on the edge of my seat, and yes, it was a great book. I loved that one. My last one before I sort of get into some honorable mentions. The next one is Recursion by Blake Crouch, I think. Yeah, I loved this one. I also really loved Dark Matter. That was maybe potentially a favorite book of mine. I don't know. I might be doing a video on favorite books at some point, but that will be on there because I loved that book, which is interesting because he's a sci-fi genre type book author. He does a lot of sci-fi, but they're kind of sci-fi thrillers. These are basically the only sci-fis I've ever liked. So clearly I like this author. Yeah, Recursion. How do I describe this book? It was a weird one, but I loved it. I thought it was such an interesting concept, and it was, again, really well written, and the characters, like, I cared about what happened to them. So Recursion, I'm gonna do my best to explain a bit about what this book is about, but it's kind of hard to without giving it away or saying too much. I don't want to say too much, because I don't hear too many people talk about this book. This book, the tagline is kind of, well, the concept is interesting. Memory makes reality is the tagline, I think, of this book. And so it's essentially about a cop who is investigating a weird phenomenon that's happening where people, it's called false memory syndrome. So it is where people are experiencing memories that they think is real but is someone else's. They are experiencing fake memories. These memories are not real, but people are convinced that, you know, they lived this whole other life. They are convinced. And a lot of people who are experiencing this, when they sort of, boom, are back to reality, don't understand what's happening. They sort of, it all implodes, and a lot of the people who are experiencing the false memory syndrome end up committing suicide. And so this cop, Barry, is sort of investigating what is going on. How are these people having these memories? And how do we sort of stop what's going on? And then you have another perspective from a neuroscientist. I think her name is Helen. Okay, so Helen Smith, the neurologist, she, years before the false memory syndrome situation is happening, she comes up with a new technology that has to do with memories. I just have it open here because I'm a little, it's been a while since I've read this book. She is coming up with a technology that can preserve memories, with the overall intention of trying to cure Alzheimer's, because her mother has Alzheimer's, and, you know, she really wants to try and help her mother and others who are struggling with Alzheimer's. And so she creates this technology that is like preserving memories. But as you can probably imagine, things do not go as she would hope. And things sort of go awry. And then you sort of have a lot going on. There's a lot going on. And there are times where it's a little confusing, but just stick with it, because by the end, it all comes together. All the stories, it all sort of interweaves. And you sort of get a better understanding of what's going on. It feels almost like in Inception a little bit. There's a lot of like, there's a lot of memories. Is this real? Is it not? There's some time travel. There's a lot going on. But I had a great time reading this book. This was like sitting on the edge of your seat, like, what's gonna happen next? What is happening? How are they gonna, like, how is this gonna end? And I devoured it. I loved it. Probably up there with some of my favorite books. All right, we'll get into some honorable mentions. I've got 3 honorable mentions. I'm just gonna really quickly go over them. I feel like they aren't not talked enough about. Elsewhere. I just finished this book. Elsewhere by Alexis. I cannot pronounce her name. This was an interesting read that I feel like not a whole lot of people know about. This one is really just a story about motherhood. It's this young girl, Vera, and she is living in a interesting village where mothers just sort of like one day disappear. And you don't really hear from them again. You don't see them again. Almost forget about them. And it's interesting. Vera's mother ends up sort of just one day disappearing, as a lot of the mothers in this story do. And she, you know, is pretty devastated for a bit, and then she ends up being a mother herself. And then she disappears. And you see where it is that she goes. And she ends up then, after disappearing, going back to the village. And that is interesting, you know. Anyway, this was a beautiful read. It was really well written. It's a little slow, I'll be honest. But I thought it was such an interesting concept. There's a lot of themes around motherhood, around sort of postpartum, around some depression, some sort of feeling loss of identity after having a child. Like, what does your life become? Kind of thing. Clearly the author is a mother. Yeah. So yeah, I thought that was a really interesting one that not a lot of people talk about. Next up, we got a thriller. It is called The Fourth Monkey. My Goodreads review of this book was literally like something, you know what? Let me just bring it up and that'll tell you a lot about this book. Yeah, my review of this book was literally, all I could think of the entire time reading this book was of Brad Pitt yelling at Morgan Freeman, "What's in the box?" If you know, you know. If you know, you know. What's in the box? And that's literally my review of the book. If you don't know, that's a reference to the movie Seven. So that's how that book made me feel. So The Fourth Monkey is a thriller. It's about a detective, and there's this case that he's been sort of following of a man who is kidnapping women who are part of high, powerful families, usually. And there seems to be a running theme. Somebody in this family, usually the father, usually the male, has done something shady in the past. So the serial killer kidnaps the daughter. Sorry if I keep moving around, my camera keeps dying on me, saying I'm out of space. So the serial killer kidnaps a woman from this family, and it's pretty gruesome what he does. It's pretty gross. There's a box, there's body parts, there's torturous things. Honestly, it's kind of a gross read. Like, there's some body horror in it. It's a little disturbing, but it was intriguing. It piqued my interest. It was a very quick, easy read. A little gross, but if you're into thrillers, this one I feel like is not talked about very often on YouTube, but I had a great time. It's a series. I want to read the second one. I think there's 3. I want to read the others. It was good enough that I'm like, yeah, I want to finish this series. Sorry for the switch in cameras. My camera is full, so I'm now using my phone. And I am basically just going to do the outro. I just wanted an outro for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, maybe subscribe, maybe like, I don't know. Yeah, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, bye.